Hi, I'm Tim Hoerr, the CEO of Serra Ventures, a venture capital firm with locations in multiple cities here in the US. Grateful to be on Dr. Karen's show today, and we're going to talk about the intentional discovery and development of personal purpose in the workplace and a bit about risk taking and why it might not be so bad to be taking risks in our life.
My guest today is someone who knows what it takes for a business to succeed. He has used his knowledge and expertise to successfully build and sell a number of entrepreneurial businesses, as well as to advise and financially resource the businesses of many others. My guest today is Timothy C. Hoerr. Tim is the CEO and founder of Serra Ventures LLC, a venture capital firm that provides coaching, management guidance, and funding to emerging stage companies in selected high technology sectors throughout the United States and internationally. With offices in Champaign, Chicago, Park City, and San Diego, Serra has provided consulting to over 500 technology startups and has provided funding to over 90 of them. They currently manage 140 million in early stage company investments with the support of over 250 limited partner investors. In 1983, Tim graduated summa cum laude from Illinois State University with a degree in accounting and business information systems. He received the Bone Scholar Award, the highest undergraduate award of Illinois State, and went on to win national awards on the Certified Public Accounting Exam and Certified Management Accounting Exam. Tim was formerly a partner in the international accounting and consulting firm RSM in Illinois and San Diego. He spent nearly 15 years with the firm. In the 2000s, Tim served as president of SourceGear, a software firm, and then as co-founder and chief executive officer of iSight, a bioscience instrument firm which won numerous technology and business awards, including Best Places to Work in Illinois. The company was acquired by Sony Corporation in 2009. Tim won the Entrepreneurial Excellence in Management Award at the Innovation Celebration in 2009. He served as the CEO of Immuven for 2 years while he was launching Serra Ventures. Immuven developed a targeted T-cell receptor therapeutic for various disease indications, and it was acquired by a major pharma company in 2014. A consummate entrepreneur, Tim has enjoyed many previous ventures to include owning, along with two partners, Game Day Spirit, the official fan store of the Fighting Illini, University of Illinois. He also was owning, along with 8 co-investors, and directing a Jimmy John's gourmet sandwiches franchise located in Central Texas. Also owned, along with a co-founder, Collegiate Marketing Incorporated, and also was the executive producer for the film Beyond the Mask. Tim is the author of the book, Risking It, an intersection of faith and work, as well as another book, Thank God It's Monday, a toolkit for aligning your life vision and your work. Tim and his wife of 37 years, Tony, reside in Champaign and have 3 adult daughters, 3 sons-in-law, and 6 grandchildren. Tim also serves on a number of nonprofit and corporate boards. So as you can see, my guest today has lots of experience. And Tim, I want to welcome you to the Voice of Leadership and to Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Karen. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. Dang, that bio sounded a bit long and drawn out, but thank you so much for your comments and for having me here today.
Well, thank you for being here. I just want that my audience to know that you are a person not only who knows what you're talking about from book learning, you've actually been through the School of Hard Knocks life experience to come to us today with what you'll be sharing. And Tim, as you already know, I was so excited when a mutual contact introduced the two of us because I've worked with a lot of venture capitalists over the years, done a lot of work in the VC world, and you are the first venture capitalist that I've ever met who was a man of faith. And so I was very intrigued by that. And I said, oh, I've got to have you on the show, and we've got to hear a little bit about your journey. So I just want the audience to know that's part of the reason why I really wanted you to be with me today, Tim.
Yeah, well, it is a bit of a rarity to find venture capitalists that come from a faith-based background. There's a few of us out here, and certainly this is an industry that needs a faith-based perspective. So we're super grateful and we're humbled to be able to bring a kingdom perspective to the venture industry.
Thank you so much for doing that. And I want to just start really, Tim, by asking you, because you and I know what venture capitalists are and what they do. Many people may not know what is a venture capitalist, what do VCs do? So tell us a little bit about that first.
Sure. It's actually pretty simple. Venture capitalists kind of you can boil it down into about 4 to 5 different activities. One of the things that we do is we take money from a variety of investors, and that can be individual investors, it can be institutional, like pension funds, endowments, and we pool that money. So that's sort of the first thing that we do is aggregate a pool of capital, and that's called a venture capital fund. And then we go look for investment opportunities. And in our case, we typically look for early stage high technology companies, but other funds, look for other types of companies. So we scan the universe of startup companies and we find those that would be a good investment, those that meet some very specific criteria. So that's sort of the second thing that we do. Once we've made an investment, and a typical fund will make anywhere from 10 to 20 or 30 investments. It varies, from firm to firm. Our funds typically are somewhere in the mid 20s to 30 companies in total that we're investing in out of one fund. And then after we've invested, probably one of the most important things happens. We become the coach to come alongside of those entrepreneurs and those teams to help them advance their company to the next level. So we're all kind of working together to help that company grow and succeed. And then the last thing we do is seek exit events or sale events. So our funds extend over a 10-year period of time. And in that time, we attempt to get into each company via an investment, and then to exit it via a sale of that company to, say, another large entity. The company might go public. They might have a management or an ESOP buyout. Any of those types of things would be called an exit event. So that's what venture capitalists do. It's really, it's fairly, simple on one hand, although it sort of takes a number of years to kind of figure out how to do it well.
Yeah, it certainly takes some expertise along the way to do it, in fact, too. And what I'm hearing as you describe what venture capitalists do, we're really talking about investing in businesses, really at the heart of the American way. It's at the heart of kind of like a capitalist system of operation. And what I think is particularly important about what you said is that the investment is not just money, it's also investment of knowledge, investment of business acumen and expertise, so that those businesses can be successful. And then when they're sold or they in some other way have an exit, that the investors actually have an opportunity to also get paid on that end as well.
That's right. In this business, we think the most important thing to do is to come alongside and invest our expertise, our experience to help those teams through the inevitable difficult times that they're going to encounter. They're going to come up against competitors. There might be a new technology that's introduced that's somewhat in the same space as theirs. They're going to have people problems, right? Businesses have people problems. So we're going to bring our expertise. Our entire team of managing partners, there are 4 of us, have each run companies. And that's an important part of what we bring to the table, in addition to the capital, is bring that expertise and of course, empathy, right? I mean, I have great empathy for what our entrepreneurs are going through. And yeah, hopefully at the end, our investors win by seeing an increase in their investment across all these different companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really an exciting field to be in. So your journey to becoming a VC, I would say, was not a straight line function. There were twists and turns along the way. So how did you get here? How did you get into this field?
Yeah, I don't think I planned it per se. I had the 15 years in public accounting and saw numerous clients. I was always excited to see, what was going on in the variety of companies that I worked with. I had construction clients, manufacturing clients, restaurant clients. Was always really intrigued by the opportunity that entrepreneurs have to solve problems in the marketplace and to succeed, to create jobs. That always fascinated me. After public accounting, as you shared in the bio, I had an opportunity to run a couple of tech companies, and that was, duking it out in the trenches and slogging through a lot of problem solving. But it was really an awesome experience to take a company from start to finish successfully. And that's when I began to get the notion that, this might be something I would enjoy doing with other companies, and venture capital was sort of a natural way to think about that. And ultimately, when I was done running my last tech company, the opportunity to start Serra Ventures occurred, and that's kind of how it happened. Again, it wasn't by design per se, but really through the collection of experiences I'd had leading up to that.
I always think that's exciting too when we think about our lives, that there is a collection of experiences that ultimately will lead us to the places where we end up going and the different doors that open up. And of course, your journey is very similar in that way. So let me ask you, Tim, about this. As we head into life and do what we're doing, and certainly it's true for you too, there's often a wilderness experience along the
Mhm.
way to the promised land, if you will. So when you think about your journey, what was maybe a wilderness experience that you went through as you're trying to figure out what's next or where God is leading you? Maybe one that seemed like things weren't going so great and you had to figure that out.
Well, I knew you were going to ask me something like that. It's never easy to talk about failure, and I've had my share of failure and wilderness. Let me just share one experience in particular. You talked a little bit about the book, one of the books I wrote. Thank God It's Monday. I wrote that while I was still a partner with the public accounting firm RSM. I was located in San Diego. Really felt like God started to speak to me during the writing of that book, that maybe it was time to take the leap of faith, so to speak, to start my own consulting firm. And I did that. I started an entity called Lifevision in 1998. I left the comfort zone of a big public accounting firm and really felt like I was prepared from a experiences standpoint, from a passion standpoint, from so many different angles. It really seemed like this was what I was supposed to do. And I would describe the next 2 years as sort of a major faceplant, as in I couldn't succeed at anything for about a 2 year period of time, doing my own thing as Lifevision. So, what had worked so well for me for many, many years in schooling and then in public accounting, just didn't seem to work anymore. And that was a really, really difficult time. I felt sort of like everything kind of got stripped away from a professional affirmation standpoint. Pretty much all I had left was my family and my faith. It seemed like pretty much everything else had vanished in that 2 year period of time.
When you say vanished, you're also talking about even the financial security as well. That wasn't so great during that time.
Well, yeah, talk about investments gone awry. I'd actually taken $25,000 each from my brother-in-law, and my father, and then an associate and I each put in the same amount of money. So it was a relatively modest amount of money, but it was significant for each of these people. All of that was lost, which makes Thanksgiving dinner somewhat uncomfortable. In addition to that, my personal resources depleted pretty much almost to nothing, because I wasn't really pulling a salary, so to speak, during that 2-year period of time. So in addition to the investment dollars, the personal bank account was dwindling rapidly.
Now, we both know you are extremely successful now, have gone way past those days. So, as you reflect and you look back on that experience, what's your understanding about why God allowed this period in your life?
That is a really good question. I think I'm still gaining understanding about that so many years later, almost, 25 some odd years later. Part of it was to ultimately do what I do today, to be really effective at helping entrepreneurs navigate highs and lows. And in entrepreneurship, there are many lows and there are many lonely moments. To really have the right perspective, the right empathy. If I'd had nothing but success in my life, I wouldn't have the goods to deliver to each of the entrepreneurial teams that I deal with today. I think that was part of it. I think part of it too was just, and God needed to humble me in a lot of regards. I'd had a lot of success in life, in school, and I'd risen to success in the accounting firm pretty rapidly. And I think God's always concerned more about our character than our accomplishments. And so there were some deep things in me that he needed to accomplish from a character building perspective, that make me who I am today. And I think those are the main reasons. I'm still occasionally asking him for a little more light, because it really was super painful. And yeah.
You really can't underestimate that empathy part that you talked about. I see it as kind of like a Jesus approach. And what I mean by that, Jesus came here in humility to be in human form and not just come as an adult, having to come as a baby, go through birth and all of this, to empathize with us so that we would be able to see that he understands the journey that we're on as well, the pitfalls, the difficulties, the challenges. And when you think about the entrepreneurial journey, as you were saying, it's up and down. So if you had only experienced the ups, how could you really empathize, with the entrepreneurs who are in the down space? And how would you be able to see that it's even possible for them to get past some of those bumps? And therefore, this might still be a good investment, even if it looks a little upside down at the moment. So I do think that that empathy part is huge. And then the other part, the character building, God's always about that in all of our lives, the character building aspect. And when I think of it, I think that if we have so much success ourselves and on our own, we might have to ask the question, where's the room, for God to do even greater things in us? And so I see that as part of what you're sharing as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think God is he's interested in building our faith, and what better way to do that than to take us through moments of failure and disappointment to build our faith. Do we still believe in him? Do we still believe in the purpose to which he's called us? Do we still get up the next day and move forward as opposed to giving up? Those are things where he's actively building our faith and our commitment to him through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Tim, you know that I strongly believe that Christian marketplace leaders are actually ministry leaders. And I think that to work in business is really a spiritual calling. So I would like to ask you to share with us something about your spiritual calling to this role. How did you get here from a spiritual point of view? How did God call you?
I have felt the call of God in some sense from a very, very young age, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I grew up in a faith-based family. My father was an entrepreneur, but he was also a lay minister. I ended up having a couple of siblings go into the traditional definition of ministry as pastors and missionaries. So when I, started my career in public accounting, I had made sort of an assumption that how this sense of calling would ultimately be fulfilled for me would be to one day go into ministry, as in the traditional definition of ministry. That in 1989, I was about 6 years into my accounting career. I was headed off to a small group leader retreat, and about 2 days before that retreat, I had really quite a compelling dream. That dream consisted of being in the St. Louis airport, which was an airport I flew through pretty frequently coming out of Champaign, Illinois. I was in the D concourse, the TWA concourse back in the days of TWA. And I distinctly remember feeling that I needed to get to St. Louis, even though I was in St. Louis. And the dream ended with me being in the line for Cincinnati, which seemed bizarre. Anyway, short story, the short version of the story I shared with my sister, one of the pastors at our church, at this small group leader retreat, and in the next couple of days, that I'd had this dream. Didn't really give her any other context, but unbeknownst to her, I sort of had this sense of, this could be potentially my call, into ministry now. It seems like a natural inflection point is about to occur. Well, she prayed through that, came back the next morning, I think it was a Saturday morning, and had received, in essence, an interpretation from the Spirit in regard to this dream. And the bottom line was, I was at a major point of inflection, she said, even though she had not known that, and that I was attempting to get to a saintly place, St. Louis, but I was already in the saintly place, the place where God had me, and that to do anything different would be a sin, Cincinnati, which sounds a little corny, but when she shared this, I felt like a power wave come off of her and over me. It like literally knocked me back physically. And I just instantly knew that I was called to the marketplace, that this anointing of, ministry was where I already was. And, it really was a powerful, powerful event to catalyze the continuation of then my ministry that was 1989. So, now that's been an over a 30-year journey of working out, what does it mean to be a minister in the marketplace? But that's how I got here.
Well, thank you so much, Tim, for sharing that story. And to me, that's a very inspiring example. A lot of times people believe that the ministry is only in the pulpit, so to speak, or on the mission field. And in reality, God has his people everywhere, in the workplace, the marketplace, and we're in ministry too. And there are lives in those places that he wants us to touch and wants us to make a difference with. So I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for answering the call to marketplace ministry. And I'm also glad that your sister was connected enough with God that she was able to hear the meaning of the message and then to share it with you as well. So, Tim, I want to follow up from that and ask about this. I believe that when Christians use spiritual principles and practices at work, that everyone really in the business benefits, not just the Christian. So, how have you used spiritual principles in the workplace, and what's been your outcome and experience?
This is an area that is sort of front and center for me. I very much subscribe to the notion that faith, work, life can be integrated with one another, and really it is about each day implementing, an active walk with the Spirit and tapping, into the, biblical truth and spiritual truth. Just some examples. I feel compelled as a venture capitalist to be gracious, extend grace, which is not a normal function for a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists are to be stoic and to be, looking out for their own interest and the interest of their investors. A lot of times venture capitalists are very crude and rude to the companies that are pitching them. I feel called to be gracious. I feel called to be present, to listen, to learn, to again, reflect and be quiet as opposed to talk. So those are some spiritual principles to have, and again, to have integrity from all roles that I play, whether that's a husband, a father, a grandfather, a coworker, an entrepreneurial coach. Those shouldn't be compartmentalized from one another. They ought to flow naturally. I ought to be the same person in the one role as I am in the other. Another maybe final one, and there are many, is just to ask the Holy Spirit, what are you doing in this moment, in this particular day? How do I cooperate with that? And the more I find that I ask that question, I find that he'll answer it and point me either subtly or sometimes not so subtly to do something, to say something, to take a particular action. So those are just a few examples.
I think that's really powerful. And in the being gracious and listening and so on, you are looking at short-term and long-term benefits. You're also looking at a win-win. It's not just short-term for the investors. What's a win for that entrepreneur? What's a win for the VC company? I mean, there's so many different places where there could be a win, and not all venture capitalists think in that way. So I think that's pretty powerful. I know I shared with you before that I've worked with many venture capitalists. And one of the ways in which I did that, I was working with the Kauffman Foundation, the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation out of Kansas City, and through their Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. And they were raising up a whole new generation of venture capitalists that had a social entrepreneurism mindset, and particularly those who would invest in companies that traditionally might have a difficult time finding investors, women-owned companies, minority-owned companies, and sometimes maybe some businesses that just didn't have the track record yet. And at the same time, they were good investments. So to hear you say, yeah, I'm going to seek God and ask him, what is he doing in this moment? Because he might lead you in a way that doesn't go with conventional wisdom.
Well, that's right. And with early stage companies, there's really only so much tangible evidence of what might be success, right? I mean, there are only so many things that we can evaluate, and really ultimately we do need to rely on the Holy Spirit telling us this is a person or this is a team that you can invest in, that you can bet on, so to speak. So it really does ultimately come back to the people involved. And often, the God's directing us to invest in a particular team that maybe doesn't have X or Y or Z that's tangible or obvious, but there are other factors involved that will very likely make this company successful. So that's sort of front and center for me, is again hearing that voice, hearing that direction, and then making the decision on that basis.
Yeah, so often the decision about whether to invest or not is a lot about the people. It's a lot about leadership. It's a lot about those aspects that I care about, excellent leadership in organizations and companies, and being able to ascertain and determine what are those leaders made out of who are sitting in front of you and thinking about the investment. How likely are they to follow through? Are they going to fall apart at the earliest sign of trouble, or just what's going to happen?
I'm glad you said something along those lines, because if I survey the companies that have not been successful, of the ones that we have invested in, and certainly we do have companies that ultimately don't achieve what they were set out to be. I would say almost universally there is some type of a people issue, a leadership issue involved. Not in every case, but in almost every case. And so, you look at all the different factors that might impact a company's success or failure, and yet you can boil it down in our experience to people issues, integrity issues, leadership issues. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And that then, it just reinforces the notion that we need to be investing in the right teams, the right people that are subscribing to, again, they may not be believers per se, they might be, but that they are attempting to embrace leadership principles and the right way of doing life and work.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we know that you've got supernatural assistance in terms of, the relationship with God and the wisdom that God has that's beyond earthly wisdom in terms of making some of those decisions. Share with us some of the hard decisions you have had to make as a leader of a VC firm.
They're almost daily, well, at least weekly. I'll just give you one example, and I think this kind of illustrates, the notion of balancing the needs of companies and investors and so forth. So we recently had a company that was there's an instrument called a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for future equity, and the SAFE can ultimately convert into equity in the company. And the maturity date had come, and it was time to potentially convert this instrument. And there was sort of a penalty value because the company had not been able to raise money beyond these safes. And so the entrepreneur came to me, and to the other investors, and asked if we would potentially add some time to allow them to raise more money and to not see those safes converted at the penalty value. And, strictly speaking, for our investors, I should have converted at that penalty value, because you want to come in at the lowest possible price as an investor, right? You buy low, you sell high. But as I began to think through and balance that with the aspect of serving our companies and the impact that decision may have on the morale and on my relationship with this entrepreneur, I decided I needed to grant his request, even though technically it was probably not, quote unquote, the right thing to do, from strictly a numbers standpoint. But I firmly believe it was the right decision on behalf of all the parties involved, right? So here's a case of having to balance something, in a very nuanced way to hopefully benefit all parties. And yet that's, that answer to that isn't always obvious.
Yeah, no, that would be a very difficult decision. How did your investors handle it? How did they respond back when they got wind of your decision?
Yeah, a couple of them I did have to have conversations with, and I just explained the rationale. I said, in these types of cases, that it isn't always necessarily just by the numbers. There are these human factors in play. These companies are run by humans. This is a company that had worked long and hard to raise more money. The footnote to this is they ultimately did go on to raise a round here, just closed it about a month ago. And this earlier conversation kind of happened back in September, right? So it did work out. The company was able to do what it needed to do. It was a very, very small difference. Ultimately, the actual number that it would have been in September versus the number that happened in November, was, yes, it was it would have been slightly better to do the deal in September. But the reality is, I think we all, won out of the situation. And I was able to explain that perspective that, these are the types of thing. These are judgment calls. This is what you pay us for as the venture capitalists, to make some of these not obvious decisions that hopefully are win-win-win for, win for our firm, a win for the investors, a win for that portfolio company and its team.
That's a great example. I love that example. You can't always just think about it on the one-sided aspect. You've got to think about the whole picture. And those are tough calls. Those are very tough decisions. It requires those conversations too on the back end to help other people understand why you made that choice and how it's better in the long run, to make that kind of a decision. So I know, Tim, that you also have a perspective on risk taking. What's involved in risk taking from your perspective, and why do you believe that people should take more risk?
I love the topic of risk and risk taking, and the Spirit has led me over time to increase my risk taking. A move to the state of California in 1995, leaving the big firm to start that ill-fated Lifevision, the decision to move back. Those are all decisions that have a fair degree of risk involved. I think ultimately risking is about that question that I referred to earlier, and it's asking the Holy Spirit, what do you want me to do today? And often the answer to that question is, Tim, get outside your comfort zone and do X. Well, that turns out to be a risk to do that. If I'm going to do something that's outside my comfort zone or do something that the direction of the Spirit outside my normal, quote unquote, that is going to be a risk. And so what about that? Well, in the process of taking that risk, my faith muscle grows, right? My dependency on God grows because I'm now out of my zone that I'm familiar with or comfortable with. So it's a place where God can use me and build character and grow my faith. And a lot of risk taking has to do with building our faith. Those two are actually very closely linked. So it's why I encourage people, be on the lookout for the Holy Spirit telling you to do X that might be outside your comfort zone and take a risk.
It's really easy to do something that I know how to do and that I have the resources for. But when you're trusting God for something so much bigger than what you know how to do, that is indeed a risk. It is a faith walk. It is certainly a step out there. And you've demonstrated that even with the losses that you experienced and so on, that wasn't the end of the story. That was just a little chapter along the way that God used to bring you to even greater success later. And so I think for a lot of people, getting out of the comfort zone is hard because they say, well, what if I end up in the wilderness, and have to go through that. And for a lot of people, the notion is I'll end up in the wilderness and that's the end. There's no way out of the wilderness. So how might you advise people as they're faced with these risks, given your experiences and what you already know, how do they get past those natural tendencies to resist the risk taking?
To believe ultimately that God doesn't guarantee the outcome of the risk taking, and yes, the risk may lead us through a wilderness experience, but we need to come to the knowledge of, number one, God is for me. He is intimately acquainted with what I am going through, be that a wilderness or a challenge or a disappointment or a failure. And it is a process, and he will faithfully be with us. He will be present with us in the process. So the outcome or the actual thing that might take place in the risk taking, that isn't known to us. And yeah, it might be good, it might be bad, at least temporarily speaking, but I can have confidence that God is with me. He is intimately acquainted. He is for me, and he is good. So in that context, okay, now I can embrace more risk. And for some of us, it might be smaller risks to start, and that's okay. It's not necessarily a cross-country move or a job change. Ultimately, those might be presented to you as opportunities, but I do think he wants us each to be increasing our risk taking, and I think he meets us where we are in that regard.
So what I'm hearing there is start where you are, even if it's small. And I think about mustard seed faith as you're talking about that. And we know the mustard seed is like so tiny you have to put it in a little magnifier to even see it. And I'm also hearing sort of the building blocks of Romans 8:28, which talks about how that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purposes. Doesn't mean everything is good. However, God will take all of that and work it for our good, just as he worked Joseph's imprisonment, Joseph's enslavement for the good of both Joseph and his family. And so a lot of what I hear you saying in this is start small, be willing to take those steps and watch God work. It's a lot of what I hear you saying.
Absolutely. And, understanding that God is rarely in a hurry, with regard to what's happening in our lives. I mean, we might be in a hurry, right? I'm typically in a hurry. God gives me a vision or a notion of where I might be able to get to, and I want to see it in the next 30 days. He might be interested in seeing it over the next 30 years. Now that's an extreme example, but he's rarely in a hurry, with regard to kind of what he's doing in our lives. But I can take comfort again in the fact that he's with me in the middle of that, working it for good.
Amen. And I don't think 30 years is really outside of God's way of operating. He tends to work in 30s and 40s and numbers that we think are excessive. So I think you actually give a good example when you say it could take 30 years. So, Tim, I know that you've written those two books, Risking It, an intersection of faith and work, and then also Thank God It's Monday, a toolkit for aligning your life vision and your work. Tell us about each of the books. What will readers get as they read the books and how they can get them?
Thank God It's Monday was the book that I wrote in 1998 and 1999. So it's a number of years in the rearview mirror, so to speak, but it's still a very, very timely topic. It's actually a collection of tools and principles for intentional discovery of one's personal purpose, which frankly is a journey that I've been on for, many, many years, probably going all the way back, to when I was 5 or 6 years old. I don't think I've ever completely arrived, and that's okay, because, the development and the pursuit of purpose really is a lifelong thing that God takes us through. But that's what Thank God It's Monday is about, is you are going to spend the largest share of your waking hours in some type of a work pursuit. Why not be intentional then about aligning one's work with one's purpose? And how do you take, again, intentional, purposeful steps toward that discovery and that the development, of a concrete sense of purpose? So that's what Thank God It's Monday is about. It still is available on Amazon, even though it's a 20 some odd year old title. And there are some really cool exercises at the end of each chapter, so it's super practical. Risking It, an intersection of faith and work, is a book that I wrote more recently. It was 2014-15, and it's really more of a memoir of my own risk-taking experiences, hopefully shared in a way that can be encouraging to others, that can hopefully see themselves in similar circumstances, and how, just on a very practical way, God led me and my family to take various risks. And what happened, here, yes, it worked in this case, it didn't work in this case, and then sort of painting the tapestry of, how God uses those, all those collection of experiences over time. That book's also available on Amazon. So that's kind of the best way to get either of those two books.
I really love the fact that in both books, you're talking about life experience, first of all, your own experience, so it's road tested. You're also talking about what's practical. Not that it just worked for you, but these are some tools, some exercises, some reflection points that other people can use to also augment their own journey in terms of where they're going. I really like that. And the intentional aspect sort of reminds me, some work that I'm doing right now is all about creating powerful leadership legacy. And that's working with executives to think about how they can be intentional about the legacy they want to leave inside their organization, leaving the organization better, leaving the people better, and also what's next for them. So I think your books kind of like fall along a similar line of thinking, that we would like to come alongside people who are interested in being intentional about aligning their purpose with what they're doing in the workplace. So, Tim, tell people how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, the best way is probably via email, and it's super simple. It's tim@serraventures.com, and Serra is spelled Serra. So tim@serraventures.com is probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Excellent. And we'll make sure that information is also in the show notes so people can find you. So, as we're winding down things now, winding up, whatever way you want to call it, Tim, what additional words of wisdom do you have and that you want to leave for my audience of executive business leaders?
I think I'd wrap up to say, Dr. Karen, that the whole of Scripture, the law, and the prophets can be summed up in one command, that is to love God and love others. And it really is all about relationships and loving others. And that's ultimately what life and business is about. It's about continuing to sow into those relationships over time. And we will reap really an awesome harvest. It might not be immediate. It might be 5 years. It might be 10. It might be 30 years before we see some of the bountiful harvest. I think really on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, it probably won't actually be that long, but continue to sow, continue to love, continue to build bridges, and you'll see some awesome abundance and fruitfulness.
I love that. It's all about love and loving people. And we often forget that you can love people at work. In fact, God calls us to love people at work. And in our current world, there's a lot of pain at work sometimes, and a lot of suffering at work. And people are not feeling so loved in the workplace and often not elsewhere. So I think that the work that you're doing, Tim, is really important and it's really significant. So I want to thank you for being here with me today as we were unpacking some of these lessons that you've learned along the way on your journey.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to share a few thoughts, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Dr. Karen, to help develop leaders in such perilous times. As you say, these are trying times in the workplace. So never a more appropriate time to be seeking the guidance of the Spirit and embracing our faith to build workplaces that really do honor God.
Thank you again. Thanks so much. So what I want to do is just share maybe a couple of thoughts that the audience can think about in terms of what I heard you say today, Tim. And this is not comprehensive. These are just a couple of nuggets. Number one is this, that God is always in many ways going to start with us. He's going to develop our character. He's going to send us through experiences and journeys that cause us to have to trust him more, to build our faith, and to develop humility. When I think about the character of Christ, Christ was a person of humility, and God is always conforming us also into the likeness of Christ. So that's one of the principles that I heard you mention today. You also made it real clear that no matter what happens, to really remember that God is actually for you. He is for you, and there is a purpose that he has for your life in the workplace. And what I'm hearing you say is that purpose goes beyond just yourself. You're looking out there to see how multiple people can benefit in the win-win-win, and looking at the long term along the way. It's all about people, developing people, understanding people, resourcing organizations with the right people, and building character, even in those entrepreneurial business leaders as well, helping them to recognize that they can be successful in business, even as ethical business people. So I want to thank you for sharing some version of those nuggets with us today, and also for talking about the importance of empathy, being able to empathize with those we are working with. And very often it's because we've been on a similar journey ourselves. And that's certainly been your story, Tim. So thanks again for sharing that with the audience. And so I'd like to leave today with a word of wisdom that comes from Second Corinthians, the 8th chapter. And Paul is dealing with the church at Macedonia, and they are giving resources to the Corinthians. And I want you to just hear the heart of the people and what Paul says about them. So he says, starting with verse 1, he says, "Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality." So here we have a church that's struggling a little bit, and yet they're still being liberal. So he goes on to say in verse 3, "For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we should receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God." So God calls us to give a lot in our lives and in the workplace. And the first gift that we give is ourselves, first to God, and then He allows us to pour out to other people around us in a liberal manner beyond what our own resources are, because He will resource us with everything that we need to be generous.